federal response will be watched very closely by Colorado and Washington State, but they'll also be watched very closely. It'll also be watched very closely by the other states that are considering their own marijuana reforms. What about these states? Massachusetts, California, Oregon, Nevada, Maine. The question is no longer when these states will if they'll legalize. It's not a question of if they'll legalize, it's when. And there's now some very compelling evidence to suggest that they'll be legalizing relatively soon in short order. So the language of experimentation becomes a problem now. Multiple experiments, much easier to turn the boat, much harder to turn the boat around. We have to think about how to handle that. What will their versions of those laws look like, and how will they be influenced by how the federal response looks now? Don't think the well-heeled advocacy groups that are very much responsible for drafting this legislation, drafting these ballot initiatives, don't think they aren't paying attention. What they'll notice is that the federal government's going to have a much harder time thwarting legalization in Colorado than in Washington. Why? Because the Colorado initiative is so loosely written. It's much easier to crack down on legalization when there's strong regulation in place. So the easiest way to legalize marijuana, if you want to get the federal government off your back, is to simply repeal your marijuana laws and have no regulations in place. That's a perverse situation, a really perverse situation. An aggressive federal response could stimulate more loose versions of marijuana legalization with even fewer protections for the groups of people we care about, like our children. On the other hand, federal agencies could use their discretion to shape the markets in a way that offers more protection. They could use selective enforcement, make sure they go after the marijuana-related businesses that are advertising, or aren't imposing a minimum price, or aren't testing for mold or pesticides or the other yucky things we'd rather keep out of those products.